It's on loneliness in family. Last week we talked about loneliness in society. Next week we're going to talk about loneliness in yourself. But this week is on loneliness in family. So we're going to be talking a lot about like relationships that people have with their siblings, parents, how that might impact their relationships with their spouses. So without any further ado, Imam of the long version.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله ونصر الله فتح قريب المؤمنين. So, alhamdulillah, jazakumullah khair everyone for coming. Inshallah, we're going to continue on our conversation speaking about loneliness. Just to recap sort of what we were talking about last week. I didn't mean to change slides that fast. What we talked about last week was centering our conversation on a communal level. And if you haven't followed, inshallah, every week we're going to go into smaller circles, smaller domains, starting on a communal level. This week it's family, and then next week it'll be on an individual level. And so we talked about on a communal level, sort of about bowling alone and how there was a breakdown in community. And how that breakdown in community led to individualism, which then led to a breakdown in society as a large, but then because we don't have those communities, our family structures have become more and more important. So for this week, that's what we're going to pick up, inshallah. The first section, we're going to speak about history, looking into the past and into the present. We're then going to talk about gender. I don't want to talk about it too much now. We're then going to talk about how both of those two affects us as individuals. And then hopefully the conclusion will just be to wrap that up, but we can speak about that more in the next section, inshallah. The same hadith that we started off with last time, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, the parable of the believers in their affection, mercy, and compassion for each other is that of a body. When a limb aches, the whole body aches with sleeplessness and fear. The reason why we're starting with this hadith as we did last time is because the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is not only talking about us on a communal level, he's not only talking about us as a ummah, but he's speaking about us in very specific terms: affection, mercy, and compassion. And those are supposed to be the things that dictate how it is that we interact and how it is that we engage with each other. From an historical perspective, building off of some of the things that we talked about last time, society has changed drastically. In our lifetime, we've seen growth in economic ways, but technological ways, in societal ways, in unprecedented ways. It has grown so fast. And so to build off what we talked about last time, in the pre-20th century, family dynamics were unique in that family wasn't just the nuclear family that we have now, but it really was comprehensive. It talked about the extended family. And we're talking about specifically in American context. In other contexts, it wasn't just your extended family. Extended family was your entire tribe, perhaps even your entire people as a whole. In the subcontinent, you have the Sindhis and the Pathans and the Balochis, and those were your people, and your family was a part of that. Whether you're Punjabi or you're Muhajir, you belong to those people. Same thing with everywhere else in the world, but even in American context, at least we had our extended families. And marriage was often arranged for economic and social gain. Marriage wasn't, as we often will talk about this more, how we think of it now, just based on love and sort of connections. We all know Sima Auntie. It was about the duty that you had to do in arranging those marriages, and because those marriages were to help you sustain the larger family and to help you as a whole. Divorces were rare, for better or for worse. We can argue Islam has always validated and seen the permissibility of a divorce, but from whether it be a Christian perspective or just social pressures, they were very difficult and challenging to obtain. That's on a familial level. And today we're going to be sort of intertwining between a lot of different sectors, a lot of different things, because they all have affected us and the reason why our family dimensions have changed. So there have been religious changes as well. We shifted from marriage being a sacred covenant, it was a religious thing that was done, to now being more of a personal contract. People didn't get married because this was their religious duty to do, to increase the ummah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. This wasn't just a religious duty to protect their ability to be chaste or intimate. It's now just a personal thing. I can go to the courthouse and do it, etc. The religious institution also changed. In a Christian context, the church had religious authority to marry you. And if you didn't have the permission of the church, if you couldn't get married in the church, then you couldn't actually get married. In our parents' times, the masjid was very similar. If you didn't have the imam to marry you, you wouldn't even try to get married. You may try to have an aunt or uncle convince the imam, but you wouldn't have actually tried to do it. Whereas nowadays, it's which imam can we find that's going to help us get this done? How can we circumvent the imam because he's a formality in the process. I've talked to imams actually who are charging very high amounts to marry people, $1,500, $3,000. They said, you pay the DJ $10,000, but you're going to pay me $500? It's been just a formality. We need you there, check the box, keep it moving. And so how we thought of the institution of marriage, but also therefore family has changed. Divorce became more socially acceptable. One could argue that's a good thing. Actually, from a religious perspective, at the time of Sahaba, it was very socially acceptable. People married and divorced in pre-modern times, and specifically in the ideal utopian Muslim society, very easily. It was more so whether it be in a Christian society or cultural reasons stop us from doing that. But because the religious motives have been delayed, because we no longer need the imam, because it has shifted from being a religious covenant to now being personal whims, and religion has become sort of secondary to the reasons why I get married or we get married, then I can also prioritize the other things that are part of that. I want to go to college, nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying I want to focus on my career. I want to spend time figuring myself out, exploring the world, etc., etc., etc. And all of those things delay one's desire to be married or enable us to opt out completely. And so when these religious changes happen simultaneously, because the people who are setting the laws in politics are in the same milieu, they're amongst those same people, then there are going to be political changes. We saw the shift where women gained property rights, first wave feminism, government and policies started to put in norms that influence family and responsibilities. You can now go to the courthouse to get married or divorced, which circumvented the need of religion altogether. Society grew more and more secular and individual, and then that reshaped the expectations around decision-making, responsibilities, and otherwise. We also had social changes. So we talked about first what? Just family dynamics, religious changes, political changes. There were social changes. And these really impact us as Muslims. So you have globalization. We were exposed to different cultures. Our parents, maybe your second or first generation, so your grandparents, grew up, as I said last week. My grandfather married my grandmother because they lived in a house together. It was a house that was split in two. She was the cute girl who lived next door. Alhamdulillah. He went to the Korean War, came back, wrote her letters like the Notebook. They got married. But now, we've seen so much. Look at Adam said, Alhamdulillah, there's a million different ethnicities. God forbid you have a taste anyways, I digress. And so now we have blended values. Families now mix between and navigating these different cultural norms. There are shifted in priorities, whether it's capitalism or the roles in which we play in these. Technology has changed, and we'll come back to that later, and how it is that we connect with people, whether it be in our locale or otherwise. We're getting married to people from back home, from all the way across the country, and we're coming together. That's a beautiful thing, but it also introduces very new realities that shape these things. If everyone grew up together in the same community, maybe you married outside of your ethnicity, you grew up knowing Muhammad or Fatima. You've seen your parents, have seen them their whole lives, and he's got something good. But what happens when you're marrying someone halfway across the country, who you haven't known? How do you adjudicate problems when problems start to come up? All of these things lead to new things. We've had immigration, where there's mixed status households, cultural tensions, transnational families, strengthening family cohesion. That could be the other, when you have like these new forms and whatnot. But then there's also transportation. When we have a car and airplanes, and as we talked about last week, there's capitalistic, I can now expand and work in California, and because my family is not that important, I can just get up and move there. And that then creates, while yes, greater mobility, less stability. As someone who has a family, alhamdulillah, my mom lives in Maryland. And so when we need help with taking care of kids, It's not easy to just say, Mom, can you come? She's got her own life, her own needs, but it's an hour away. And so this shifts how it is that we think about family and what are the different realities and how it is that we navigate them. So that's about family alone. And that speaks about it in a very general way. I always, whenever we're talking about family, I always end up talking about gender. Because the reality is, whether or not you believe in a gender binary, you cannot talk about one gender except that it impacts the other. You cannot focus on women and think that men aren't going to be affected, and the opposite also applies. If we're talking to men, we can't think that that will also affect women. Yes, women. So many of you saw this last week. For those that are with us, let's get too fast. So pre-industrial revolution, this was the family. It's a picture, I believe, from 1903 in the UK somewhere. You lived on a farm. You had your Model T. You lived very with your family, and this was, as I forget her name now. Mary Harrington. She mentions in her book. I forget the name of the book now. Wow. But she mentions how there's economic agency in both men and women here. Because the men have a very specific role that's usually attributed to their physical strength and ability to do those things. But women aren't just sitting at home twiddling their thumbs. They're also contributing there. And so there's an equal playing field in what everyone's contributing. No one's saying, well, and at least in this time, no one's saying, well, I make the money so I determine these things. She's like, dude, I'm in the field with you. What are you talking about? But all of this changes during the Industrial Revolution. Factories are created. The farm is no longer there. We want to make money to take care to afford these new products. We're going to move to cities, and we're going to move into these factories. The problem with industrialization, the problem with factories, and if you notice, everyone in this factory is female. The problem with this, look how close they are. Look how tight and potentially dangerous those circumstances are. Think about what happens when you're pregnant and you have a baby. There are reports, particularly out of the UK, of women having babies on the floor of the factory and going back to work. It was insane. It was not tenable. No one liked it. But also around the same time, around the Industrial Revolution, you have the suburban sprawl. People are making more money. They can go try to live this American dream that for our parents, perhaps grandparents, it was actually possible. You could get your white picket fence in your house. And so because of that, we then have a shift in the economic agency. We're thinking about this in very materialistic terms. There's a shift in who has money and who doesn't. Because if we're living in the suburbs, commuting into the city, that's difficult for us. And the man now has money to do this. This is where first wave feminism comes in. And women are now trying to vie for economic power. And so that's when you have around the 50s, the cult of domesticity, it's called. You have women trying to regain economic agency by always being demure, cooking, cleaning, always looking amazing, these very superficial things, but saying, like, listen, I'm gonna now bring something to the table. And around the 50s, a little bit later, is when you start to have second wave feminism start to come about. Now, why are we talking about this? Because this time is really over. 1960, I think it's 65, 70, you have the invention of the pregnancy pill. We no longer have our women need to be relegated to a household. They can go out, they have, for the first time in human history, the ability to control whether they conceive or they don't. Forget the hippie movement for a second, let's focus on the family. And because of that, they now can work. They now can regain economic agency. Second wave, a little bit later on, third wave feminism comes about, and they're saying, man, we're equal. Hey, show us some respect. Men are like, you're right. You can make money. Let's look out. Obviously, it's not that easy. I'm sort of glossing over, but be patient with me here. That happens, and things start to shift. Why are we focusing on women? Because the spearhead of these social changes that have happened with women, and for very good reasons. The problem, or not the problem, the interesting thing that happens is that men acquiesce to this for good reasons. They're starting to recognize I can't just be sort of a tyrant in my home. My wife, whether it's because she makes money or just how I've now learned how to interact with my wife, she has skin in the game. I have to respect her, be kind, and how it is that I deal with her. But what ends up happening also with that is that men lose part of who they are, just as women have gained new parts of themselves. And so this shifts how it is that we think about family. Shameless plug, I've written 2 blog posts about this. If you want to read them, it's there. But the reason why is the last one I just published. Guys have a problem. They are 2 generations post third wave feminism. And now they're in this new situation where they're performing love. What I mean by that is they only understand the beautiful Jamali side of love. I should take care of you, I should be kind to you, I should be gentle, I should be all these things. And so I'm not going to call out any of the brothers over here, even though, whatever. Because of that, they've forgotten, not learned how to even have a backbone, how to have principles. And we know this, because I'm an imam, I talk to women all day, every day. They're like, what the hell's wrong with these guys? They're soft. We want them to work. We want them to okay, men, subhanAllah, tend to think that our women are like hardcore feminists. And I talk to sisters in the Muslim community like, bro, no, we just want to be able to work and have a job. Like, why y'all acting so crazy? If we have kids, we'll read and figure it out then. Guys like, oh my God, she's like, oh, she's going to be a hard feminist. I don't know when I'm going to get married. They're like, no, bro, chill. So this is a problem. That the cultural changes, onto agricultural wars, has destabilized things that in pre-modern times would have just been normal. A part of this that I didn't even touch on was the fact that due to the economic sprawl and the suburban movement, we live very atomized lives. What that means is we live very fractured lives. So we don't live amongst our extended family anymore. We don't have those small, tight-knit communities where we're interdependent on each other. The problem with that is that men and women no longer are sitting around listening to aunties and uncles talk about family life and all these things. So what you have is me, the imam, who women are complaining about their husbands. I'm like, yeah, that's everybody's husband. And then the husband comes and complains about the wife. I'm like, yeah, that's everybody's wife. And they're like, what? But if we lived where the women are drinking tea over here and the men are drinking coffee over here and they're all complaining about each other together, it makes them start to feel a little bit better about themselves. This tea is going to drive me crazy. And this actually happened 3-4 years ago in Ramadan. Did I tell this story last week? I don't know, sorry, I told the story too much. 2-3 years ago in Ramadan, one of my friends, we married for about 5 years. And I was at that point married around 10, 11 years. Another brother was with us, he was married 15, 16 years. And the imam was there, he'd been married 25 years. So the brother been married 5 years, like, man, my wife, this and that. She won't give me, oh man, it's so difficult. And this is like post our way, we're just sitting around chilling. I'm like, Habibi, it's okay. Everybody's wife does that, it's all good. He's like, what, you too? And then the other brother's like, of course. Like, why are you still upset about this? You need to figure out a different game plan. And the imam goes, bro, 25 years, that's still an issue? Like, I don't even recognize that anymore. Why am I telling you this story? The guy who married 5 years went home with a new look on lease on life. He's like, oh my God, it's not that bad. That enabled him to get through a marriage and relationship a little easier. I wrote the other one for my daughters. I have a series called Yabanati, both on love and marriage. But I think this is also trying to combat some of these things. Tayyib, how do these things impact us on a personal level? If societally things have changed, but then culturally they've changed as well. If societally, economically, religiously, civically, our families and how they have been put together have shifted, and because of that, we're now finding ourselves by ourselves, we're a little bit more lonely than we ever have been before. Our expectations are different. And I'm stealing this from Imam Malik. We have to give credit where credit's due. We have unrealistic, external, or uncommunicated expectations. External expectations are now the pressures that come from outside of just a husband and wife, or perhaps outside of us as individuals, that now are disenabling us to connect with our loved ones. But we could easily extrapolate that to be our siblings, we could extrapolate that to be our parents, and the other people that are part of our family system. Because now I think that my parent should be this way because of an expectation that someone is imposing on us. I talked to a young man on my way here to the masjid. He's like, my dad never showed me love and affection. I was like, yeah, that sucks. But his dad didn't think that his son would show as much as you have. Meaning, this brother's father gives far more than his grandfather gave him. But because of the external expectations, we think that all of our parents should just understand that we need a particular type of love. Now he's frustrated. He can't appreciate the good in his father. Now because of that, it's creating a disenablement to connect. But also, and this comes up not only between parents and children, it comes up in families, in marriages, etc. We have not unrealistic expectations. Where now I think that you should solve all my problems. And this is a huge thing that's coming up when we no longer have communities. Last week's conversation, and now our families have so much pressure that we think our spouse should solve all of our issues. We want our spouse to be our confidant, our intellectual jouster, our emotional person. We want them to be everything. And with that, we're putting so much burden on each other that it just doesn't allow for us to connect. And that creates larger chasms. That creates more loneliness. Not communicating. This is probably, perhaps, one of the biggest problems that we have. We have expectations that we haven't even talked about. We have expectations of our families, of our spouses, of our children, of our communities. We're going to pull that back into it. That we didn't even talk to them about to begin with. We didn't say, hey, I expect this from you as my brother, as my parents. And then we have a discussion whether or not that's practical. But because we haven't communicated, it stays in here, and now I'm resenting, I'm upset, I'm mad at you because of that, which again, the topic of our discussion, only makes me feel more lonely. And so as for us on an individual level, this is the first thing that we have to take into consideration. When we're thinking about how it is or why it is that we're feeling estranged or lonely or what's the word in English? Far from our families, let's check our expectations first. Let's do some muhasabah, some internal reflection of who we are and what we're thinking about, what we're expecting, to see how it is and what it is that needs to change. If all of my definition of what family is comes from TV and movies, then perhaps I'm not going to have what I want. Perhaps there's going to be some problems there. Likewise, if what I expect from my wife is that she's able to fly, cook, clean, do everything, and realistically she's just exhausted from dealing with kids, then I have an unrealistic expectation. This actually, subhanAllah, this reminds me of a conversation I have with my wife today. We have family friends. The wife and the husband both work. They have 2 children. And they were like, yo, we had realized spring break was coming. We had to make arrangements. Can you guys watch our kids? We had a bunch of kids who are like, sure, bismillah. What we didn't realize is that I have a bunch of girls. These are 2 boys. For those of you who don't have children, take it from me. I learned this week, there's a difference between girls and boys. My girls can play alone all day long. I can yell upstairs once and the noise stops. These boys are standing on tables, they are fighting, constant, there are black eyes every single 5 minutes. It is ridiculous. And so when my wife, she's like, what would make you convince me to take on this responsibility? And I said, well, you make everything look so easy. She said, what? I said, I had no clue that you were tired. I would have told you no. She's like, bro, I am pregnant. What's wrong with you? And I was like, oh, yeah, I didn't think about that. So unrealistic. Unrealistic expectations led to us babysitting some wonderful children, God bless them, who are not mine. And because we didn't communicate that, she didn't tell me she was tired. Let me throw it over now, right? Don't do that. Then that leads to challenges. As we start to wrap things up, there are struggles that we have to recognize in the modern marriage scene. The first of them is family. Family is interesting. It can be absolutely amazing, or it can be incredibly difficult. The problem with family oftentimes are two. One, back to expectations. We didn't communicate what it is that we're looking for. We didn't talk about these things, and all of a sudden we come home from Muhammad and say, listen, I want to marry Muhammad. We come home Fatima, this is who I want to marry. And they're like, what's wrong with you? You shouldn't have to stay inside of our culture. What's wrong with you? There are these expectations with regard to marriage. And then there causes all this problem. The second issue, so the first is not communicating. The second is our own individualism, our own selfishness, our own narcissism. Because we think that it's okay to sacrifice something that could be subjectively ours for something that's objectively ours. What do I mean by that? If you get married, this is not a blood relationship. God forbid, you could get divorced. Your family, no matter how good or how bad they are, they're not going anywhere. They're blood. And so us as modern, younger people, we seem to think, why doesn't our family just get that I want to marry this person? I don't care if my mom or my dad has all the valid reasons as to why I shouldn't. So marriage, family can become a challenge. Another challenge is just how we interact as a community. And I love to talk trash about our community because inside the community, we are, as Ustad Kauthar likes to say, we have cosplayers now. We come to the masjid, we put our religious garb on, and we start to act weird around each other. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, sister, how you doing today? You know, and it becomes this show that nowhere else in the world do I interact like that. When I go to the grocery store, I have a whole conversation with the young lady right there. When I come to the message, like, assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, sister, can you hand me that over there? Yes, I think. Why? Why do we do that? And because we do that, then it's weird. How do you meet someone when, one, that's not who we genuinely are, but two, because of that, I can't even be in the same space as you. Last week after the grounding, someone said, brother, what do you think about the brothers and sisters sitting so close together? I was like, there's a whole line here. What are you talking about? Why are y'all acting like it's split? How did it not? So we start to put these unrealistic expectations onto community, but because of that, we don't have places that people can interact. Some of the best marriages that I've ever seen are people who are in high school, college, MSA together. Why? There's no burden of marriage there. They just spent time interacting, serving, doing things together, and then one day or another something clicks in his mind, where he realizes, hey, Fatima's all right. Let me see if I can try to marry Fatima. But they've already established a relationship there. But because of our community, we don't have enough spaces like this. Kudos to all the people who established Fahwa and these type of programs. We're just not interacting enough. Which leads into the next point. Another struggle we have today are the apps. The apps are amazing. I know people who got married off the apps. Technically I did, but I didn't. My wife's friends messaged me on Facebook back in the day. But the apps create a challenge. Because I'm not dealing with a real human being, and I'm only seeing a picture, and so it's reduced to swiping left or swiping right. And not the actual person who's in front of us. And obviously it's because men are more visual than women, but it happens on both sides. And so the apps have stripped it of all the personal realities that we've had, the goodness that you would see brother so-and-so pay for someone else's coffee, you're like, this guy good, that guy, mashallah, what made him do that? You would see the sister so shy when she came to the message, like, wow, I don't see that too often anymore. That's really amazing. Or the inverse. You see a brother who's like really, really confident, and you're like, wow, that dude's strong. I appreciate that. Or the inverse, you see a sister the same way. Regardless of whatever fancies, you can't get down that. And so because of that, it makes us feel more lonely. Add to that, we believe, I forget the scientific term, that now we have endless choices. So you may have found someone on the apps that fits all of your non-negotiables. It actually could be really good match for you. But it's like, if I swipe left, there may be someone better. The grass is green on the other side. And the reality is, there's endless supply of beautiful people. I have a hot take. Anyone can marry anyone. Anyone, technically, can marry anyone. The question is, what are you willing to sacrifice and compromise to be in that marriage? Obviously, we should look for things as compatibility. We should look for family and cultural harmony, resonance. They can work together in a healthy way. Communication styles work good together. But depending on how much you're willing to sacrifice and what your overarching goals are, anyone can marry anyone. But if the grass is always greener, maybe there's a more handsome guy out there. Maybe there's a guy that's a little bit taller. Maybe the sister's a little bit more beautiful. Maybe whatever, then we continue to keep pushing things away. And that makes us feel more and more like we will never find Prince Charles. And so we have to then recalibrate what our expectations are. Going back to, as we started this, we really need to engage in some muhasabah so that we can remedy some of these issues. Lastly, I have to mention converts and the racial issue. Converts don't have the same luxury of us, those of us who have family support. Excuse me. They don't have people that they've grown up with, they've known forever in the community, who they can just say, well, do you know so-and-so who knows so-and-so? And because of that, they can just work. They're completely new to this entire thing. And so a lot of times converts feel incredibly lonely. And as I mentioned last week, I don't know if I did, but I'm gonna say it again. While I'm black, I can say this, it's actually not African Americans, usually white converts. White converts don't have any connection to Islam, the way that black converts tend to. On top of the fact that anyways. Race is another component that I put into the same sort of miscellaneous component. That due to the impact of Europe, colonialism, colorism, all of these things, we no longer can think outside of, when I say race, it's almost complexion actually. We no longer can think, well, maybe someone could be good for me who doesn't fit what I dream that my wife would look like or my husband would look like. I'm not even willing to consider a person because their skin complexion is a little bit darker than I thought my husband or wife was going to be. And this is really difficult. I jokingly tell people that when I was trying to get married, I had no shame because I was a black guy, son of a convert, in the Muslim community. So I would literally go up to all my friends and say, hey, you have a sister? Y'all cool with black folks? No? Cool, no problem. And they were like, what is wrong with you? I'm like, I'm gonna get no's most of the time, I might as well shoot my shot. Ironically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made my wife come to me, or her friends brought her to me, so my efforts did nothing. That being said, it is really difficult, and colorisms exist. And so we just need to be really practical about this and recognize that we have issues in the community that we need to work on, that these things only exacerbate the loneliness and the struggles that we find around these things. In conclusion, alhamdulillah, time is working on my side. In conclusion, loneliness is not something that we are necessarily going to fix today. It's not something that, the reason why we start off with the historical component of things is because we have to recognize that a lot of this we have bequeathed from the previous generation. We've inherited the community that we have. We've inherited the social dynamics that we have. We've inherited the things that we think, we feel, and we believe. But if there's anything that we can leave with today, is that can we be a little bit more introspective? Can we be a bit more thoughtful about our family dynamic and our family social cultural dynamic and what led to us being who we are? More introspective about me. What are values, principles, things that I hold that are healthy or unhealthy that will help me either get married and or deal with my loneliness? Those are mutually exclusive. I'm just mentioning them this way. I think it's actually a problem if we think that marriage can solve our loneliness issues, but again, that would be a conversation for a talk on marriage. So not just what our social cultural reality is, not just introspectively of who am I, what's my disposition, what are my proclivities, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses, but the last part that we really need to think about is what are we going to do? If I'm feeling lonely, should I now come to the masjid more? To be around people that share values with me, they're going to help me. To build into last week's conversation, am I going to now serve so that I can be part of a community? So that I can feel less lonely, so that now I have a larger network of people to rely on as we finished last week, so that I have people in 10, 20 years that my children will call community and call home. We have to ask ourselves, what are we willing to do now to change things about ourselves that are impediments for us being in community? Am I lazy? Am I stubborn? Am I too shy? Am I too outgoing? What is now making it so that I'm feeling lonely and not able to be and find the company that I'm looking for? All of these things. Oh, and the last point, if I want to get married, what are the things, whether it be family, interactions, the apps, or where I fit into sort of social, cultural, religious, race conversation that leads us to either be inclined toward things or not. And if we can close with anything, we need community. We need family. We need Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all of those things we have to invest. None of it's going to happen by us being passive. We're going to talk about this next week, inshallah. But it really starts internally with us. We have to start to deal with, well, who am I when I'm by myself between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How, if I want to have family, yeah, maybe there's trauma, maybe there are problems there. But what led them to act the way they are? What led them to be in a situation that they respond to me this way? And what can I do to challenge some of my preconceived notions about those things? How can I be a better family member despite those difficulties? And then how can that feed into me being a conduit to community so that everyone now can benefit to each other? And it starts with how we interact with each other here. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us all, remedy our loneliness and replace it with goodness and happiness. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us contentment in whatever He's given us and make things easy for our brothers and sisters that are suffering throughout the world, whether it be with us today or in Gaza or Sudan or Yemen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them happiness and allow them to feel closeness to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala and the righteous and pious. Allow us to benefit from what they're exposing to us so that we can earn His pleasure.
I think we saw like 5 minutes until Maghrib, so after the Adhan, I think we do like a couple of questions if anyone has some for Imam version. But we'll just wait until later.
Yes, if anyone has any questions.
So I like to be optimistic about it.
Yeah.
Right? So based off Qadr, Allah could be doing something where we see as a bad thing.
Absolutely.
Right? So to your wisdom, if we're being separated only to come back together.
I would even be more optimistic. Good question. I would even be more optimistic that we simply don't understand what's going on. Because if there's an expectation that we're going to be brought back together, what happens if that doesn't happen? You're setting yourself up for disappointment again. But if you're saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a better plan, absolutely. The question is, what are we going to do internally, individually, so that we can become stronger in this and prepare ourselves for whatever said problems are to come? Or, excuse me, openings happens. Yeah.
I have a question. My question is, you hear a lot of times people saying that it's good to reflect and it's good to look within yourself, and it's good to use the Quran, the Hadith, certain prophets, but it's like, where should a person start when it comes to the deen aspect?
My next blog post is really about this. But the title of it, the working title, is going to be On the Road to Excellence, Don't Bypass Good. I think a lot of times when we're thinking of, we have like, mashallah, these lofty goals. To use like an investor, like what's the MVP? Minimal viable products. What can help me just get started? Like what, okay, I want to be a saintly person. I want to be a multimillionaire. I want to be whatever. What is going to enable me to just get the ball rolling? So when you're trying to figure out who it is that you're going to be or what it is that you're going to do, you need this? Okay. You have to figure out what's the first step. When I was 16 and said that I want to intentionally be practicing, I said I'm not going to say oof to my mom and I'm not going to swear. I'm just not, those are two things that I can do. I can have the capacity to articulate myself better. I have the capacity to fight my nafs and not talk back to my mom. That's going to be a step. We're going to start there. Figure out, maybe you need to start with salah. Maybe you need to start with battling your laziness. Maybe you need to do more of whatever it is that comes easy to you. But just get started. One more. Yeah.
I guess since we're talking about family ties and isolation as well, what are some ways if someone does feel isolated to really strengthen those family ties or feel that everyone is pretty much connected to each other versus further away or further apart from each other?
I think we have to define what connected is. I think by our modern terms, connected means like interconnected. We are like one body, and we all have the same views, and we're all close, and we're all everything. Well, I don't know how realistic that is from a historical perspective or practical for today's matters. For some family members, like, yo, if I see you, come do that. Please, I'll make you coffee. Right? Like, but there's no bad blood right now. I just know we're not healthy to be close to each other. But we're connected. If you need something from me, let me know, I'm gonna be there. But it's better that we stay a little further from each other. There are others that I have to take initiative. And so I have to go out of my way to see these people. That means fighting my comfort. I don't want to go to these places, and I would prefer to stay in a little office and write my little articles and go to the masjid. Like, that would be my healthy, happy space. But in order to have some modicum of connection, I have to do those things. But the first step is defining what connected means to you. And what does it mean to your family? And making sure that you guys have a shared connection or a shared understanding of what connected is. Your parents may think, I love to troll my Bengalis, because Bengali mother-in-laws are the best mother-in-laws ever. I'm being so sarcastic right now. The expectation of Bengali mother-in-laws is that their son, after marriage, maintains a connection with his mom every single day, oftentimes for hours a day. And why is it not at least 2 weekends a month they spend the night over their house? I'm speaking general here, that's not always the case. Is that shared with the new wife? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. And so you have to define what connection is and then figure out, okay, their understanding of connection is, I'm defining what connection is to me is this, and then we're going to try to figure out how to bridge that gap with each other. It's going to require initiative. A lot of difficult conversations. It's going to require probably some tears and heartbreak. But if we're committed to it, this concept of family, inshallah, will be good.
So what do you do in situations where, like, you say communicate with family and stuff, but what if your parents grew up in a certain situation where you're communicating with them and they say like talking back?
Hold back. We'll talk about it. That's an amazing question.